down at the bridge in the southwest corner of Lake Merritt in Oakland, California. We're going to spend a little time looking at the geology, the human impact, and relevant climate effects on this lake and this region. So we have Jerry Lips, a micropaleontologist, marine micropaleontologist, and geologist, of course.
I do it all.
Jack of all trades, right?
So this is Lake Merritt. It formed twice in the last 200,000 or 300,000 years. Most of that period of time, sea level was much lower than it is today, and there was no San Francisco Bay and no Lake Merritt. So the lake has about 600 species, I estimate, that live in the lake, more or less permanently, although some are transient into the Bay of San Francisco and into the lake. Probably a realistic estimate, if you include everything except for bacteria and viruses and archaea, would be around 1,000 species, and that includes all the microscopic ones. About 60 of those are introduced species. They were introduced over a long period of time, starting in about 1860, 1870, when train cars full of oysters from the East Coast were driven on the railroad tracks to San Francisco Bay, and they were dumped into the bay. So they got oysters, but they also got many, many different kinds of organisms that lived with the oysters, like clams, and gastropods, and worms, and all sorts of things.
So were they trying to clean up the bay with the oysters?
No,
It was just...
They didn't like California oysters, either the way they tasted or they were too small. They wanted the bigger oysters from the East Coast. That's what they were used to.
So they introduced East Coast oysters to this area.
Yeah. And along with those East Coast oysters came all the other ones too, including many of those invasive species. One of the very common clamshells you see along the edge of the lake was introduced in 1870 to San Francisco Bay, and came here probably very quickly thereafter. There were probably introductions by other ships. For example, the Spanish came in the 1770s with big ships, and they probably introduced things on their boats into San Francisco Bay, some of which may have come here as well. We do know that since 1870, there have been other introductions, like there's another clam with little ribs on it that was introduced from Japan in 1940. So we can see that clam also in the intertidal as dead shells.
Would some of those shells be what we're looking at down here now?
Yes.
Possibly. Huh?
If you can see shells down in the bottom, the one that was introduced in 1870, Maya aeronecula, is really common, and it's pretty big.
As you can see, there are a lot of species of organisms that have come into Lake Merritt, either intentionally or accidentally. It's important to note that Lake Merritt is not the only place to experience this. Nearly every corner of the Earth has experienced the invasion of non-native species. And this is part of how life on Earth evolves and how it changes ecosystems. The only concern we have to consider is how rapidly these bioinvasions can happen with human influence, whether it's through fish farming, ballast water, or even through conservation efforts, among many other transportation vectors. The other concern, of course, is what the impact these non-native species have on human livelihoods.